My name is Margaret Wilson. I'm 68 years old, and I invited my son to a boardroom meeting, letting him believe we were there to discuss his inheritance. In reality, I was there to orchestrate his downfall in front of his biggest investor. It's a little after 9 p.m. here in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the house is finally quiet. It's the kind of quiet that feels earned, heavy with the silence of battles fought and won. For those of you tuning in, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Sometimes knowing you're not alone, even across oceans and time zones, makes all the difference. This is my story. The scent of old leather and wood polish in my office has always been a source of comfort. It's the smell of stability, of something built to last, a sensory anchor in the often turbulent sea of my life. I built Wilson Construction from the ground up with my late husband, Robert. We were a team, his vision and my pragmatism forging an empire from little more than grit and a second mortgage. After he passed away from a sudden heart attack 15 years ago, I didn't just keep the business afloat. I steered it through a recession and doubled its value. It was my legacy, my fortress. But for the past 20 years, that fortress had a persistent crack, a structural weakness I refused to acknowledge publicly. And its name was Trevor. My son, my only child, walked into my office that Tuesday afternoon with the same look he'd worn since he was a teenager who'd wrecked his first car. A practiced blend of manufactured confidence and deep-seated entitlement. At 40 years old, it was a look that had long since curdled from boyish charm into something pathetic. He paced in front of my mahogany desk, the one Robert had proudly picked out decades ago, his restless energy filling the calm space. "Mom," he began, forgoing any pleasantries. He always dispensed with the small talk when he wanted something, which was the only time he ever truly sought me out. "I've got it. The one. This is going to change everything." I leaned back in my chair, the leather groaning softly like an old friend sharing my weariness. I didn't need to ask. It was always a game changer. I had a mental Rolodex of his game changers. There was the boutique vineyard in Sonoma that withered from a blight he hadn't bothered to research. There was the eco-friendly tech startup that never produced a single prototype, only a very expensive lease on a trendy office space. I vividly remembered the day I had to write a check to a furious landlord to avoid a lawsuit, the shame hot on my cheeks. And who can forget the chain of gourmet food trucks, a venture that ended with me fielding tearful calls from unpaid suppliers and tracking down the repossessed vehicles in a dusty impound lot. Each failure was a fresh wound, followed by this exact scene, the same desperate, unearned gleam in his eyes. "What is it this time, Trevor?" I asked, my voice flatter than I intended. It was the voice of a woman who had run out of hope, but was contractually obligated by love to keep listening. "Biotech," he said, spreading his hands wide as if presenting a masterpiece he hadn't painted. "A small lab in Raleigh. They're on the verge of a breakthrough in synthetic skin grafts for burn victims. It's revolutionary. All they need is a final round of funding to get through the last phase of FDA approval. I can get in on the ground floor. 50,000, Mom. That's it." 50,000. He said it so casually, like he was asking for pocket money to take his wife to dinner. It was a fraction of what he had already lost, a single drop in a bucket that had no bottom. For years, I'd kept a private ledger, hidden in a locked file on my computer. I told myself it was for accounting purposes, but I knew the truth. It was a monument to my own foolishness, a detailed accounting of every time my love had overruled my business sense. The total was creeping dangerously close to $200,000, money I'd earmarked for a peaceful retirement, for spoiling my granddaughter Emma, for a foundation I'd always dreamed of starting in Robert's name. "No," I said. The word was quiet but absolute. It landed in the space between us with the finality of a gavel. Trevor's face fell. The salesman's smile vanished, replaced by the petulant scowl of a teenager whose allowance had been cut off. "No, just like that. I bring you the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to be part of something that will actually help people,
And you just say no? The attempt to frame this as a noble cause was particularly galling. I've seen a lifetime of your opportunities, Trevor, I said, my gaze unwavering. My love for my son was a fierce and painful thing, but the woman who ran a multi-million-dollar company knew a bad investment when she saw one. And Trevor, for all his talk, was the worst investment of all. The bank of Mom is closed, permanently. You never believed in me, he shot back, his voice rising with practiced indignation. Never! You built this whole empire and you can't stand the thought of me having my own success. You want me to stand under your thumb forever? The accusation stung, as it always did. It was his favorite weapon, the one he wielded to make me feel guilty for my own hard work, for the very success that had funded his comfortable, aimless life. Robert would have seen right through it. Don't let him mistake your love for weakness, Maggie, he used to say. The boy needs to stand on his own 2 feet or he'll never know what he's made of. Robert had been gone for 15 years and Trevor's feet were still planted firmly on my wallet. I love you, I said, my voice tight with the truth he refused to hear. But success is built, Trevor. It's earned with sweat and risk and sleepless nights. It's not bought. And it's certainly not handed to you on a silver platter that you can then pawn for your next bad idea. You're 40 years old. It's time you learned that. I stood up, the movement stiff, signaling the end of the conversation. I love you, but my answer is no. He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes dark with a resentment that felt ancient and bottomless. It was the look of a man who blamed the world for a hole he had dug himself. Then he turned on his heel and walked out, slamming the door hard enough to make a framed photo on my wall rattle. It was a picture of him and me with Emma taken at her high school graduation just last year. In it, we were all smiling, a perfect family for the camera. As the silence of the office settled around me again, I sank back into my chair. My hands were trembling slightly. I hated these confrontations. They hollowed me out, leaving me with the bitter taste of failure, not as a CEO, but as a mother. I wondered, not for the first time, where I had gone so wrong. Why had my love and support created a man instead of a partner, a dependent instead of an heir? He was right about one thing. I wanted him to have his own success. I just never imagined he would try to achieve it by destroying mine. As he reached the edge of the outer office, he turned back, his face a mask of cold fury, visible through the glass wall. He mouthed the words, silent, but chillingly clear. You'll see, Mom. One way or another. I'll get what I'm owed. At the time, I dismissed it as the empty threat of a spoiled child. I didn't know it was a promise.
3 days later, a knot of dread in my stomach, I was pulling into the driveway of my son's ostentatious new home in a gated community called the Enclave. The name itself felt pretentious. It was his 40th birthday party. The embossed invitation had promised a casual evening of cocktails and celebration, but the fleet of luxury cars, Mercedes, BMWs, even a gleaming new Porsche, lining the street and the uniformed valet service at the curb told a different story. Trevor and his wife, Meredith, were living well beyond their means, a fact they seemed determined to advertise with the subtlety of a fireworks display. As I handed my keys to the young valet, a boy who couldn't have been older than Emma, I saw my neighbor from 2 doors down, Bill Henderson, leaving a nearby house where he was visiting a friend. Bill's a retired Charlotte Mecklenburg police detective, a sharp man in his 70s who misses nothing. He has what he calls a healthy sense of curiosity, which means he knows the business of everyone on the street. Evening, Margaret, he said, tipping a phantom hat. His eyes, still sharp as a hawk's, took in the scene at Trevor's house. Quite the shindig. Trevor must have finally hit that big promotion he's been talking about. I gave him a tight, non-committal smile.
Trevor had been on the verge of a big promotion for 5 years. Something like that, Bill. Celebrating the big 4-0. Well, 40's a milestone, Bill said, though his eyes narrowed slightly. He seemed on edge lately. Seen his car peeling out of here at all hours. Hope everything's all right. His comment was innocent, but it pricked at my unease. On edge? Peeling out at all hours? It didn't fit the picture of a man celebrating success. I thanked Bill, smoothed down my silk blouse, and walked toward the house, the sound of laughter and loud, bass-heavy music growing with every step. It felt less like a home and more like a nightclub. The moment I stepped over the threshold, Meredith was on me. She was a striking woman, always dressed to the nines, in clothes that were just a little too tight, a little too flashy. Her smile was as bright as it was brittle. She worked as a financial advisor, a profession that seemed entirely at odds with her and Trevor's reckless spending. "Margaret, you made it," she chirped, her voice an octave too high. She kissed the air beside my cheek, enveloping me in a cloud of cloyingly sweet perfume. She pressed a heavy, oversized glass of red wine into my hand before I could even say hello. "We were so worried you wouldn't come. Trevor was just heartbroken after your little chat the other day. He gets so passionate about his projects." The guilt trip started before I'd even taken my coat off. "A mother and son are allowed to disagree, Meredith," I said, taking a small, obligatory sip of the wine. It was a Cabernet, a good one, an expensive one. Of course," she said, her smile never faltering as she steered me into the throng. "Let's not talk about business tonight. Tonight is for family, for celebration. You have to meet the Hendersons. Their son just made partner at his law firm." For the next hour, it felt like my glass was a magic chalice that never emptied. The moment I set it down on a coaster, either Meredith or Trevor would appear, as if from nowhere, a bottle of that same expensive Cabernet in hand, topping it off with a cheerful insistence that was starting to feel less like hospitality and more like a strategy. "Don't be a stranger, Mom," Trevor would say with a wide, false grin. "You work too hard. You need to relax." They paraded me around the crowded room, introducing me to their friends, people with soft hands and loud voices, as my wonderful, generous mother, the CEO of Wilson Construction. It was a performance, and I was the star prop, the living proof of their inherited prestige. I felt like a show pony. The only genuine moment in that sea of phoniness was when my granddaughter Emma found me by the French doors leading to the patio. At 18, she had her grandfather's kind eyes and a sharp intellect that was all her own. She was the reason I put up with all of this, the steady, beating heart of our fractured family. "Grandma," she said, wrapping her arms around me in a tight hug. The scent of her light, floral perfume was a welcome relief from the suffocating cloud of expensive cologne and hairspray that filled the house. "I'm so glad you're here. I wouldn't miss your father's big day for the world," I said, squeezing her hand and meaning it, despite everything. She glanced at the wine in my hand, a small frown creasing her brow. Her gaze was so much like Robert's when he was trying to figure something out. "They're really pushing the drinks on you tonight." "It's a party, sweetheart," I said, trying to brush it off, not wanting to worry her. But she was right. I was starting to feel a little fuzzy around the edges, my head lighter than usual. I rarely drank more than a single glass of wine with dinner. This was my third, and it felt like my fifth. Emma got pulled away by a group of her friends, and I found myself cornered by one of Meredith's colleagues, a man who launched into a long, boring story about the stock market. I nodded along, my mind drifting. I needed some air. I needed to clear my head. That's when Emma came back. But this time, her face was ashen. The laughter was gone from her eyes, replaced by a raw, undiluted panic that jolted me out of my wine-induced haze. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin with surprising strength. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice trembling so badly I could barely understand her. "We have to leave right now." "What? Emma, what's wrong?" I asked, looking around. The party was still in full swing. A new wave of guests had just arrived. Nothing seemed out of place. Please, she begged, her eyes wide and pleading, darting around as if she expected to be overheard. Don't ask questions, just trust me. We have to go now. I've run a company for 30 years. I've faced down union leaders, hostile competitors, and city inspectors. I know how to read people. I know the difference between teenage drama and genuine fear. And in that moment, the terror in my granddaughter's eyes was the most real thing in that entire house. All right, I said, my voice low and steady. I put my half-full glass down on a nearby table with a decisive click. All the fuzziness in my head vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Adrenaline is a wonderful antidote to alcohol. We started for the door, a direct path through the crowd. And that's when Trevor and Meredith intercepted us, their smiles looking more like grimaces plastered on their faces. "Mom, where are you going?" Trevor asked, physically blocking our path. "The party's just getting started. We haven't even cut the cake." "I'm not feeling well," I said, my hand firmly on Emma's back, a protective gesture. "Emma is going to drive me home." "Nonsense," Meredith said, her voice a little too high, a little too shrill. "You can't leave. It's Trevor's big night. Just one more drink for the toast." "We have to go," Emma repeated, her voice stronger now, laced with an urgency that was almost desperate. I looked from my son's panicked face to his wife's frantic one. They weren't concerned about my health. They weren't disappointed about a missed toast. They were terrified of me leaving. And in that instant, I know something was terribly, fundamentally wrong. I trusted my granddaughter's instinct without a second's hesitation. It was a decision that would end up saving my life's work. "Get out of our way, Trevor," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. I steered Emma around them and walked out the front door, leaving them standing there, their perfect party turning to ashes around them. The real reason for their panic was far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. The moment the heavy oak door of my car clicked shut, sealing us in a bubble of silence away from the party's pulsating music, the carefully constructed composure Emma had maintained inside the house crumbled. She collapsed against the steering wheel, her body racked with shuddering sobs that seemed to come from the deepest part of her soul. I reached over and pulled her into a hug, my heart aching as I felt her small frame tremble against mine. She felt as fragile as a bird. "Shh, sweetheart," I murmured, stroking her hair as she cried into my shoulder. "It's all right. We're safe now. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. Just breathe. Tell me what happened." It took her a few minutes to compose herself enough to speak. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand and took a shaky breath, the streetlights of the quiet suburban neighborhood illuminating the glistening tracks of her tears on her cheeks. "I went upstairs," she began, her voice hoarse and broken. "My phone was dying, and I thought Dad might have a power bank in his office. I know I'm not supposed to go in there, but I just needed it for a second." She paused, swallowing hard as if the words themselves were painful. The door was cracked open. I heard voices. Dad and Mom and two other men. They were in the little sitting area at the end of the hall. They were talking about you. I waited, my blood turning to ice in my veins. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, began to spread through my chest. "They were laughing, Grandma, laughing about how much wine you were drinking. One of the men, he had this slick, oily voice. He said, 'A few more glasses and she'll be happy to sign anything just to get to bed.' And Dad laughed and said, 'Don't worry, she's almost there. Meredith's got her on the fast track.'" My breath hitched in my chest. I felt a physical pain, sharp and deep, as if a hand had reached in and squeezed my heart until it bruised. The casual cruelty of it, the image of my own son laughing about my intoxication, it was a betrayal so profound it almost didn't feel real. "I froze," Emma continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I couldn't move. I hid in the alcove by the linen closet. They walked past me, heading for Dad's office. I heard Mom say, "Just make sure the signatory pages are on top. We don't want her getting bogged down in the details." And the other man said, "Don't you worry, Meredith. It will look just like a standard family trust update. She won't suspect a thing." The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening finality. The lavish party, the constant refills of wine, Trevor's desperation for money, Meredith's plastic smile. It wasn't a birthday celebration. It was an ambush, a meticulously planned, cold-blooded ambush. They were planning to get me, their own mother and grandmother, drunk to the point of incapacitation and trick me into signing away the company I had poured my life and soul into. My legacy. Emma's inheritance. "But it's worse," Emma choked out, fresh tears welling in her eyes. She looked at me, her own face a mask of guilt and horror. "I knew I had to get you out of there, but I needed proof. I couldn't let them just deny it. So after they went into the office, I slipped into Mom's little study nook down the hall. I know her password. She writes it on a sticky note under her keyboard. Her laptop was open." She fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped it. She swiped through her photos and then held the phone up to me. The screen glowed in the darkness of the car, a malevolent blue light. It was a photo of an email. The subject line read, M/W plan, final strategy. My eyes scanned the bullet points, each one a dagger to my heart, twisting deeper than the last. Phase 1. Saturate target with alcohol upon arrival. Goal, impaired judgment and emotional compliance. Phase 2. Introduce K&L legal team as retirement advisors. Frame documents as standard estate planning. Emphasis on securing durable power of attorney, effective immediately. Contingency. If target resists or becomes suspicious, cite recent memory lapses and confusion to suggest cognitive decline to any witnesses. Plant seeds of doubt about her capacity. Contingency. They had a contingency plan, a plan to gaslight me, to paint me as a senile old woman in their initial scheme failed. They weren't just trying to steal from me, they were willing to steal my dignity, my credibility, my very mind in the process. I stared at the screen, the words blurring. The part of me that was a mother, the part that had loved and nurtured and forgiven for 40 years, went silent. It didn't die. It receded into a cold, dark corner of my soul, and in its place, something else rose up. It was the part of me that had built an empire from rubble, the part that had stared down men twice my size in boardrooms and on construction sites and had never, ever backed down. The CEO took the wheel. "Drive, Emma," I said, my voice eerily calm, stripped of all emotion. As she put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb, another memory surfaced, sharp and ugly. My car sitting in my driveway just 2 days earlier with all 4 tires slashed. The police report I'd filed, Mr. Henderson's vague description of a figure lurking in the dark. It hadn't been a random act of vandalism. It had been a message, a punishment for saying no. My own son had done that. The realization didn't bring more tears. It brought a terrifying, crystalline clarity. This wasn't just about money. This was about a deep, rotten sickness in my son's soul, a sickness his wife was not only enabling, but actively cultivating. They hadn't just crossed a line, they had torched the entire map. When we got to my house, I made Emma a cup of chamomile tea and sat with her until the trembling stopped. I saw her to the guest room, tucking her in like she was a little girl again. Once she was settled, I walked back to my study. I didn't reach for a tissue. I reached for the phone. I dialed the number of my personal lawyer, a man I trusted implicitly. It rang twice. Davies. "Arthur, it's Margaret Wilson," I said, my voice betraying no emotion. "I apologize for the late hour, but we have a serious problem." I paused, looking at the smiling photo of Trevor on my desk. With a steady hand, I turned it face down. A hostile takeover attempt, and it's coming from inside the family.
The next morning, at 8 a.m. sharp, my study no longer felt like a place of quiet refuge. It had been transformed into a war room. The air was thick with the scent of brewing coffee and righteous indignation. Arthur Davies, my lawyer for over 30 years, sat opposite me. He was a shrewd, silver-haired man with eyes that had seen every form of human greed and folly. Yet what I told him on the phone last night had still managed to shock him. Beside him sat my personal assistant, Linda Jenkins. Linda had been with me since the beginning, a fiercely loyal woman whose quiet efficiency was the bedrock of my daily operations. I'd hired her 25 years ago when a nasty divorce had left her with 2 young kids, mountains of debt, and a cheating husband who'd cleaned out their joint bank account. I saw a fighter in her then, and she had never let me down. Her loyalty wasn't just professional. It was a bond forged in shared battles against a world that often underestimated women of a certain age. I had laid out the whole sordid story, finishing with the picture of the email on Emma's phone, which I'd had Linda print out and place in the center of the desk. Linda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes flashing with a protective fury. Arthur, who had already heard the gist, studied the printout, his face an impassive mask, but I could see a muscle twitching in his jaw. "The ungrateful, parasitic little," Linda muttered, her voice thick with disgust. She looked at me, her expression full of a pain that mirrored my own. "Margaret, I am so sorry." Arthur finally spoke, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate with controlled anger. "This is more than just a family dispute, Margaret. This is a criminal conspiracy. Conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted elder financial abuse. The list is long. We can go to the police right now. We can file for a restraining order. We can sue them into the next century and own the very clothes on their backs." I held up a hand. "No." They both looked at me, surprised. "A public lawsuit would be a circus," I said, my voice cold and measured. I had been up all night, staring at the ceiling, my mind a whirlwind of grief and rage. But as the sun rose, a cold, hard clarity had emerged. It would drag on for years. The media would have a field day. Construction magnate Sue's son. It would tarnish the company's name, Emma's name. My granddaughter would be forced to testify against her own parents. I will not put her through that. And in the end, what would it accomplish? It would make them martyrs in their own minds, victims of their powerful, controlling mother. No, I don't want to play their game. I want to play mine. Arthur leaned forward, a flicker of understanding in his sharp eyes. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting a legal battle. I'm planning a corporate execution. Clean, swift, and utterly devastating. They tried to use the tools of business against me. Contracts, legal counsel, financial leverage. I'm going to show them what a master of those tools can do." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Arthur's face. "I'm listening." For the next 2 hours, we mapped out the strategy. It was a high-stakes gambit, but it was precise, elegant, and ruthless. "First," I said, turning to Linda, "I want you to pull every financial record we have involving Trevor. Every loan I co-signed, every bailout I provided, every promissory note he defaulted on. I want a complete portfolio of his financial incompetence, cross-referenced and indexed. I want spreadsheets, charts, a full presentation. Make it beautiful, Linda. Make it undeniable." Linda nodded, her fingers already flying across the keyboard of her tablet. "I'll have it by noon. It will be a work of art." "Next, Arthur," I continued, "Meredith. She's a licensed financial advisor. She used her professional position to conspire to defraud a client, a senior citizen no less, which makes it elder abuse. What does her industry's code of ethics say about that?" "It's a career death sentence," Arthur said, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. "The Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, FINRA, would revoke her license permanently. Given the premeditation here, she'd be lucky to avoid prosecution for fraud. They take this sort of thing very, very seriously." "Good," I said, "but we don't file a complaint yet. We hold that. It's a key piece on the board, our queen."
The final part of the plan was the most audacious. I am going to call a meeting. Here, in the main boardroom at Wilson Construction Headquarters. Friday. Morning. Linda and Arthur exchanged a look. A family meeting? Linda asked, tentatively. On the surface, yes, I replied. I will invite Trevor and Meredith under the pretense of discussing a proposal to set up a significant trust fund for Emma's future. I'll tell them I've had a change of heart, that I want to ensure their financial security as well. It's bait they won't be able to resist. They'll think their plan worked, that I'm scared or feeling guilty, and that I'm ready to pay them off to keep the peace. And who else will be at this family meeting? Arthur asked, already guessing the answer. That's the beautiful part, I said, feeling the first spark of my old fire return, burning away the fog of grief. I happen to know that Trevor's biggest potential investor for his biotech scheme is a man named George Peterson. Peterson is an old-school businessman who values integrity above all else. He'll be invited to offer his wisdom on the structure of the trust. And Meredith? Her firm's managing director for the Southeast region is a woman named Diane Finch. I'll invite her as well to provide professional oversight on the financial arrangements. They'll all be in one room, brought together by their own greed and ambition. Arthur let out a low whistle. You're not just setting a trap, Margaret. You're building a theater, and you're the writer, director, and star. Exactly, I said, standing up and walking to the window, looking down at the city I had helped build. They wanted to put on a cheap, sordid little play for me in their home. I'm going to host the grand finale on my stage, in my boardroom, surrounded by my achievements. I'm not going to send an anonymous complaint or have my lawyer fight my battles from a distance. I want them to see my face when their world comes crashing down. I want them to understand who they were foolish enough to challenge. The air in the room was electric. The pain and shock from the night before had been transmuted into pure, cold resolve. This was no longer about a mother's broken heart. It was about a queen defending her throne from a coup. Arthur, make the calls, I commanded, my voice resonating with an authority I hadn't felt in years. Linda, get me that portfolio. I have a meeting to prepare for. The phone call to Trevor was one of the most difficult performances of my life. I had to bury the icy rage that was simmering just below the surface and resurrect the voice of the concerned, slightly yielding, and emotionally weary mother they expected me to be. I had to sound like a victim, like a woman who had been pushed to her limit and was now ready to capitulate. I waited 2 full days, letting the silence fester. I knew they'd be on edge, wondering why I hadn't called screaming, why I hadn't disowned them. The lack of an immediate, emotional reaction would be more unnerving to them than any outburst. When I finally called his cell on Thursday afternoon, he answered on the first ring, his voice tight with a mixture of apprehension and defiance. Mom?
Trevor, dear, I began, intentionally injecting a note of tired resignation into my voice. I pictured myself as an actress preparing for a role. I've been doing a lot of thinking since your party. Oh? The single word was cautious, but I could hear the underlying eagerness. He was biting. I may have been a bit hasty the other day in my office, I continued, hating the words even as I said them, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. You and Meredith are building a life, and Emma, her future is so important. I think it's time we had a proper discussion about long-term planning, about her college fund, and about your future, too. Perhaps I haven't been fair. There was a beat of charged silence. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the calculations being made. Then, triumph, thick and syrupy, dripped from his voice. I knew you'd come around, Mom. I knew you'd see it our way. We just want what's best for the whole family. I want to do this properly, I said, pressing on, reeling him in. No more arguments. Let's meet at my office, in the main boardroom, Friday at 10 a.m. It feels more official there, more serious. I'd like to propose setting up a substantial trust for Emma, and I'd like you and Meredith to be co-trustees, with a generous salary for managing it.
This was the masterstroke of bait. Giving them perceived control over a large sum of money, plus a salary, was an irresistible lure. It validated their scheme and promised them the reward without any of the risk. "Of course, Mom, we'll be there," he said, barely containing his glee. "Meredith will be so pleased. This is the right thing to do." I added the final, crucial detail, making it sound like an afterthought, a concession to my own anxieties. "And since this is a significant financial decision, and frankly, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed by it all, I've taken the liberty of inviting a couple of people to ensure everything is above board. George Peterson, I believe you know him. I thought his investment expertise would be invaluable. And Diane Finch, Meredith's managing director, to provide professional guidance. I want to make sure I'm protected. You understand." If he felt any flicker of suspicion, his own colossal ego immediately extinguished it. To him, this sounded like I was not only giving in, but was also trying to impress his investor and his wife's boss. It was a sign of my complete surrender, a public acknowledgement of their financial acumen. It was perfect. That's a great idea, Mom," he stammered, his voice filled with counterfeit sincerity. "Very thorough. It shows you're taking this seriously. We'll see you Friday." He hung up, and I allowed myself a single shaky breath. The hook was set, the trap was baited. Across town, in their glass and chrome house that my money had indirectly paid for, I could picture the scene. Trevor, puffed up with pride, strutting into the living room where Meredith was likely scrolling through designer websites. "I told you, baby," he'd say, pouring them both a celebratory drink. "She just needed a little push, a show of force. Now she's ready to talk about my inheritance, our salary as trustees, the whole 9 yards. She's even bringing in Peterson and your boss to witness it. She's finally admitting we know what we're doing." Meredith's reaction would be more controlled, but no less triumphant. She'd tell him, "This is it, Trevor. Our future is finally secure." But I knew something they didn't. I'd had Linda do a quiet but deep dive into Meredith's financials. It wasn't hard. A few discreet inquiries with the right people, a friendly chat with a contact at a credit reporting agency, revealed a mountain of hidden debt. High-interest credit cards maxed out, a personal loan from a shady online lender with predatory interest rates, and most damningly, Linda uncovered records of large cash withdrawals from ATMs near a casino just over the state line. Whispers of a gambling problem she thought she'd kept perfectly hidden. Her desperation wasn't just about a lavish lifestyle. It was about staving off a complete financial implosion. That knowledge gave me an extra layer of certainty. She wasn't just greedy, she was trapped. And trapped people make fatal mistakes. My final preparation was a call to Bill Henderson. "Bill, it's Margaret Wilson," I said when he answered. "Margaret, good to hear from you. Everything okay over there? That party looked like it ended abruptly the other night." "Getting there," I said, my voice steady. "Bill, you mentioned you had security cameras. I have a very sensitive, private reason to ask, but would you be willing to check your footage from the night of Monday the 12th? Specifically around my driveway, late in the evening?" "Say no more," he said, the old cop in him resurfacing immediately. "I'll take a look and bring a copy over. Discretion guaranteed. You know me." An hour later, he was at my door with a small, black USB drive. He didn't ask questions, just handed it to me with a grim, knowing look in his eyes. "I think you'll find what you're looking for," he said quietly. "I'm sorry, Margaret." Alone in my study, the door locked, I plugged the drive into my laptop. The footage was grainy, stamped with the time and date, and then I saw it. A figure emerged from the shadows at the edge of the frame. It was my son, Trevor. His face, illuminated for a moment by a passing car's headlights, was a twisted mask of rage. I watched, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest, as he methodically, brutally, plunged a knife into each of the four tires of my car. My car! The one I'd used to drive him to his first day of school, to his soccer practices, to his SATs. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just saved the file to my desktop. I named it Checkmate. The pawns were now in position. The board was set for the final devastating move. Friday morning arrived with a sky the color of slate, a fittingly somber backdrop for the day's business. The main boardroom at Wilson Construction was my sanctuary and my battlefield. It was on the top floor, a cathedral of glass and steel overlooking the Charlotte skyline. The long polished table could seat 20, and the far wall was a single pane of glass offering a panoramic view of the city. I had built this room to project power, stability, and unshakable confidence. Today, it would serve as a courtroom. I was there first, of course, an hour early. I stood at the head of the table, my usual seat, and looked out at the city that I had helped build, its skyline dotted with cranes bearing the Wilson logo. This was what they had tried to steal, not just the money, but this, the proof of a life lived with purpose. The guests arrived in staggered succession, just as I had anticipated. Diane Finch, Meredith's boss, was first. She was a woman in her late 50s, sharp and impeccably dressed in a severe navy suit, with a reputation for being ruthless in business and intolerant of failure. She greeted me with a crisp, professional handshake. "Margaret, a pleasure. Meredith speaks very highly of you." "I'm sure she does," I replied with a thin smile. Next came George Peterson, Trevor's potential investor. He was a portly man in his 60s with a booming voice and a handshake that could crush walnuts. He radiated an air of old money confidence. "Margaret, good to see you. Trevor tells me you're finally ready to put the younger generation to work. Wise move." "Wisdom is what this meeting is all about, George," I said smoothly. I had them seated on one side of the long table, facing the presentation screen. They chatted amiably, two sharks circling what they believed to be a lucrative opportunity. Finally, Trevor and Meredith arrived. They swept in 5 minutes late, a classic power move they thought made them look important and in demand. In reality, it just made them look like amateurs in a room full of professionals. Trevor wore an ill-fitting suit that was a size too tight, the fabric straining at his shoulders. Meredith was dressed in a severe, dark red dress, the color of blood, playing the part of the serious financial powerhouse. They were radiating an aura of smug, triumphant victory. They thought they had won. "Mom," Trevor said, leaning down to kiss my cheek with a theatrical warmth that made my skin crawl. He smelled of expensive, overpowering cologne. "Diane, George, so good of you to come and lend your expertise to our little family matter." "Of course," Diane said coolly, her eyes appraising him. "Meredith is one of our rising stars. We're always happy to support her clients' families." They took their seats directly opposite Diane and George, placing themselves on my side of the table. In their minds, they were my team, my successors. They were aligning themselves with power, oblivious to the fact that the real power in the room was about to crush them. I remained standing at the head of the table, a silent point of authority. I let the silence stretch for a moment, enjoying the flicker of unease that began to cross their faces as the professional pleasantries died down. I let them feel my control of the room. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice calm and clear, amplified slightly by the room's state-of-the-art acoustics. "I've called this meeting because, as some of you know, my son and his wife have expressed concerns about the future, about legacy, inheritance, and providing for my granddaughter, Emma." I saw Trevor and Meredith exchange a small, almost imperceptible smile. This was it, the big payoff. This was going exactly as they'd planned. "I believe in transparency," I continued, my eyes sweeping across the table, making contact with each person individually. It's the bedrock of trust. So before we discuss any new arrangements, like a trust, I think it's prudent to review the existing financial landscape to ensure all stakeholders have the full picture before moving forward. Before anyone could respond, I gave a subtle nod to Linda, who was standing discreetly by the control panel near the door. The Wilson Construction logo on the screen vanished, replaced by the first slide of my presentation. It was titled, in a clean, bold font, "A History of Investments, a Financial Review of Trevor Wilson, 2004 to 2024. Trevor's smile faltered, then died. Meredith's face went rigid, her posture stiffening as if bracing for a physical blow. The slide was a simple, brutal list. It detailed every failed company, every defaulted loan, every single dollar I had poured into his ventures, complete with dates, descriptions, and the final lost amount for each one. The Sonoma Vineyard, the tech startup, the food trucks. It was all there, a clinical autopsy of a failed career. The final tally at the bottom of the screen was displayed in a bold red font that seemed to bleed into the white background. It was $197,450. I turned my gaze to George Peterson. "George," I said, my voice gentle but firm, the voice of one CEO to another. "You're a savvy investor. You've built your reputation on making smart choices and backing winners. I just wanted to provide you with a more complete due diligence report on your potential new partner. I believe in full disclosure." George Peterson stared at the screen, his jovial face turning a blotchy shade of purple. He slowly, deliberately, turned his head to look at Trevor, who was stammering, his face pale and slick with a sudden sheen of sweat. It's taken out of context. Those were learning experiences. Every entrepreneur has setbacks." I didn't give him time to recover. His pathetic defense was exactly what I expected. "Linda," I said calmly, "next slide, please." The air in the boardroom grew thick and heavy, charged with a tension you could almost taste. It was the suffocating silence of a courtroom right after the prosecutor presents a damning piece of evidence. George Peterson wasn't looking at the screen anymore. His furious, betrayed gaze was locked on my son, a predator that had just realized its chosen prey was sick and weak. Trevor, for his part, looked like a fish gasping for air on a hot dock, his mouth opening and closing without a sound. Meredith sat frozen, a statue of rage and panic, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of the heavy table. I let the silence hang for a beat longer, allowing the full weight of that nearly $200,000 figure to settle over the room. It wasn't just a number. It was a story, a 20-year saga of failure, poor judgment, and dependency, now laid bare for the very man Trevor was trying to con into giving him more money. "Learning experiences are valuable," I conceded, my voice still deceptively mild, as I began to walk slowly along the side of the table, my heels clicking softly on the marble floor. The sound was deliberate, rhythmic, like a clock ticking down. I stopped and turned back to the screen, my silhouette framed against the gray sky. "But perhaps I'm being unfair. A man's past shouldn't necessarily define his future. What truly matters in any partnership, in any family, is character, integrity, trust." I let the word trust hang in the air. And that, of course, brings us to the present. "Mom, this is hardly the time or place for this," Trevor finally managed to choke out, his voice a strangled whisper. "This is a private family matter." "On the contrary, Trevor, I cut him off, my voice losing its gentle edge and taking on the hardness of steel. When you make plans that involve my entire life's work, it ceases to be a private matter. And when you invite your potential business partners and your wife's boss to witness our negotiations, you make it their business too. I gave Linda another nod. The slide with Trevor's financial history vanished. It was replaced by a new one, this one stark white with just a few lines of black text. It was the photo Emma had taken of Meredith's laptop screen blown up to fill the 90-inch display. The resolution was perfect. Every malicious word was crystal clear. The title was there for all to see: MW Plan. Final Strategy.
I didn't need to read it aloud this time. The words screamed from the giant screen, each bullet point a separate indictment in their trial. Phase 1. Saturate target with alcohol upon arrival. Goal. Impaired judgment and emotional compliance. Phase 2. Introduce K&L legal team as retirement advisors. Frame documents as standard estate planning. Phase 3. Secure signature on asset transfer agreement, disguised as family trust document. Emphasis on securing durable power of attorney, effective immediately. Contingency. If target resists or becomes suspicious, cite recent memory lapses and confusion to suggest cognitive decline to any witnesses, plant seeds of doubt about her capacity. A collective, sharp intake of breath went through the room. It was a sound of genuine shock. Diane Finch, Meredith's boss, physically recoiled as if she'd been struck. Her face, usually a mask of cool professionalism, was now a canvas of disbelief and fury. George Peterson's jaw went slack, his cigar-chomping mouth hanging open. This time, I addressed Diane directly. My voice was low, almost conversational, but it cut through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel. "Diane," I said, meeting her horrified gaze, "Meredith is one of your rising stars, I believe you said. I run a large company. I deal with risk every day. But I have to ask, what is the protocol at your firm when one of your licensed financial advisors conspires to defraud a client? When they leverage their professional knowledge and position of trust to orchestrate a scheme to steal the assets of a family member? A senior citizen, no less." I paused, letting the legal term sink in. I believe the industry term is elder financial abuse. Diane couldn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed on Meredith, and if looks could kill, my daughter-in-law would have been incinerated on the spot. "There is no protocol for that, Margaret," she said, her voice shaking with a rage she was struggling to contain. "It is unthinkable. It is a violation of every rule, every ethic, every ounce of human decency that our profession is supposed to stand for." Meredith finally snapped. The cornered animal inside her came out snarling. "This is an invasion of privacy, a fabrication. You can't prove any of this," she shrieked, her carefully crafted composure shattering into a million pieces. She stood up, pointing a trembling finger at me. "It's a misunderstanding. We were just trying to help her with her estate. She's getting old. She's confused. She forgets things. We were worried about her." She was invoking the contingency plan, right there in front of everyone, trying to paint me as a confused old woman. It was a fatal, desperate mistake. "Confused?" I repeated the word softly, letting it hang in the air. "You think I'm confused?" I walked back to the head of the table and picked up a small black USB drive that had been sitting next to my notepad. A USB can be misinterpreted. Context is everything. I looked at Trevor. His face was a mess of sweat and terror. He wasn't looking at his wife. He was looking at the USB drive in my hand. He knew what was coming. "You see," I said to the room at large, my voice now resonating with the full force of my authority. "This whole affair isn't just about financial planning. It's about character. It's about what a person is willing to do when they think no one is watching.
I inserted the USB drive into the port on the table's control panel. The screen flickered. "Linda," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, a command that sealed their fate. "Run the file labeled Checkmate." The giant screen at the end of the boardroom flickered, and the damning email screenshot was replaced by the grainy black and white feed from a security camera. The time and date were stamped in the bottom corner in a stark digital font. MON 12 Sep, 11:47:32 p.m. The image was of my own driveway, my own car, a late-model Lincoln Navigator parked peacefully under the soft ambient glow of a porch light. The room was utterly, completely silent. The only sound was the faint, almost inaudible hum of the building's ventilation system, like the building itself was holding its breath. Trevor stared at the screen, his body rigid, his breathing shallow and ragged. He looked like a man watching a replay of the car crash that was about to end his life. Meredith, still standing, looked from the screen to Trevor and back again, a dawning, sickening comprehension on her face. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The scene was deceptively tranquil. Then a figure slipped out from the shadows at the edge of the frame, moving with a furtive, angry energy that was palpable even on the low-resolution video. As he approached the car, he stepped into the pool of light, and his face was momentarily illuminated by the headlights of a passing vehicle on the street. It was unmistakably Trevor. No one in the room breathed. We watched, a captive audience to this ugly, private horror, as the figure on the screen pulled something from his pocket. It glinted under the light, a knife. The on-screen Trevor approached the front tire. He glanced around, his movements jerky and paranoid, like a common street vandal. Then, with a vicious, stabbing motion born of pure malice, he plunged the knife into the rubber. The sound was subtle on the recording, a soft, violent hiss of escaping air, but in the dead quiet boardroom, it sounded as loud as a scream. He didn't stop there. Methodically, brutally, he moved around the car, the front right tire, the rear left, the rear right, each time the same furious, deliberate act of destruction. This wasn't a moment of fleeting passion, it was a ritual of hatred. It was the act of a man trying to cripple the very symbol of his mother's independence. When he was finished, he stood back for a moment, breathing heavily, looking at his work with a grim satisfaction. He wiped the knife on his pants, cast one last dark look toward my house, and then melted back into the shadows from which he came. The video ended. The screen went black, leaving everyone to stare at their own shocked reflections in the dark glass. The silence that followed was profound. It was the silence of a tomb, the silence that follows an irrevocable act. It was heavier, deeper, and more damning than any accusation I could have ever uttered. I let it stretch, letting the ugly, undeniable truth of what they had just witnessed sink into every person in that room. I didn't need to say a word. The video had said everything. It laid bare the petty, violent, and cowardly core of the man that called me Mom. It was the final, irrefutable proof of his character, a visual postscript to the story of his financial incompetence and his wife's fraudulent ambition. George Peterson was the first to break the silence. He pushed his chair back with a loud, grating scrape, the sound jarring in the stillness. He stood up, his face a mask of utter disgust. He didn't even look at Trevor. He looked at me, his expression one of deep personal offense. "Margaret, my sincerest apologies for ever wasting your time and for my catastrophic lapse of judgment in even considering doing business with that boy." He then turned to Trevor, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "Don't you ever contact me again. Don't call my office. Don't send me an email. As far as I'm concerned, you don't exist." He turned and walked out of the boardroom without a backward glance, his heavy footsteps echoing his finality. Now all eyes were on Diane Finch. She rose from her chair with a chilling, lethal calm. She walked around the table until she was standing directly in front of Meredith, who had sunk back down in her seat, her face chalky white and vacant.
Clean out your desk, Meredith. Diane said, her voice barely a whisper, but carrying the weight of a guillotine's blade. Our head of HR and the security team will meet you at your office to escort you from the building. A formal notice of termination for gross misconduct and a comprehensive report to FINRA will be on your lawyer's desk by the end of the day. You are finished in this industry. You are a disgrace to it. Meredith began to sob, a pathetic, gulping sound that held no dignity. No, please, Diane, I can explain. Diane ignored her completely, as if she were a piece of furniture. She turned to me, her expression a mixture of profound apology and newfound professional respect. Margaret, I am profoundly sorry that you and your family had to endure this. My firm will cooperate fully with any legal action you choose to take. If there is anything my firm can do— You've already done it, Diane, I said quietly. Thank you for coming. She nodded curtly, a silent acknowledgement of the grim business that had been concluded, and followed George out of the room. And then there were three. Me, standing at the head of the table, in complete and total control. And them, my son and his wife, shipwrecked, destroyed. Their grand plan, their life of lies, had ended here, in this room, in total, abject humiliation. Trevor finally looked at me. The arrogance was gone. The anger was gone. The entitlement was gone. All that was left was the hollowed-out shell of a man, his eyes filled with a dawning, childlike horror, and for the first time in his life, genuine fear. "Mom," he whispered, the word a plea, a question, an accusation all in one. "Why?" I looked at my son, the boy I had raised, the man he had become, and I felt nothing but a vast, cold emptiness, the quiet that comes after a devastating storm has passed. "I told you that once before, Trevor, in my office," I said, my voice clear and steady, resonating in the silent room. "I told you then that success is built. This, all of this, is just another building lesson. This is the consequence of your choices. You built this. Now, you get to live in it." I turned my back on them and walked toward the windows, looking over the city I helped build. "Linda," I said, not looking back, "please show them out." The aftermath was swift and silent as the execution itself. There were no dramatic headlines, no messy public lawsuits that would have dragged our family name through the mud. It was all handled with the cold, quiet efficiency of corporate and regulatory machinery, a series of dominoes falling in a perfectly straight line, just as I had planned. George Peterson, true to his word, not only pulled his potential investment, but also made a few quiet phone calls to his network of investors and bankers. He didn't need to shout. A man of his stature only needed to whisper. Within a week, Trevor's name was poison in the Charlotte business community. The biotech firm, upon hearing of the debacle, sent him a curt legal letter severing all ties. Any other funding prospects he had, real or imagined, evaporated like mist in the morning sun. He was a pariah, branded not just as a failure, but as a man with a fatal character flaw. Meredith's fate was even more clear-cut. Diane Finch was a woman of her word. The termination was immediate. The report to FINRA was filed the same day, a thick dossier detailing the conspiracy, complete with my testimony and a copy of the email. An investigation was launched, but it was a mere formality. Faced with the irrefutable evidence, Meredith's career in finance wasn't just over, it was annihilated. She was permanently barred from the industry, her name added to a public list of disgraced advisors. Her mountain of hidden debt, without her high salary to service it, quickly became an avalanche that buried her. About a month after the boardroom meeting, I heard through the grapevine that they had put their house in the Enclave on the market. The sale was a desperate one, a fire sale in real estate terms. The lavish parties were over. The pressure of their shared failure and public disgrace was a crucible, and their marriage, built on a foundation of greed and convenience, crumbled under the heat.
I wasn't surprised when Linda quietly informed me that Meredith had filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. There was no grand inheritance to fight over, no assets left to divide. There was only debt and ruin, and the bitter taste of recrimination. I heard they spent their last weeks in that house, screaming at each other, the sound echoing through the empty, oversized rooms, each blaming the other for their spectacular fall from a grace they had never truly earned. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. The day of the meeting, after they had been escorted from the building by a stone-faced security guard, I had gone home and felt nothing but a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. It was the weariness of a surgeon after a long and difficult operation to remove a cancer. The procedure was a success, the cancer was gone, but the patient was left scarred and weakened. My primary concern was Emma. She had been the unwitting catalyst for this whole ugly affair, the innocent bystander caught in the crossfire. The day after the meeting, I drove the 2 hours to her campus dorm. We sat on a bench in the campus quad, the crisp autumn leaves skittering across the pavement around us. The air was clean and cool. I told her everything that had happened. I didn't spare her the details, because I owed her the truth. She was an adult, and she deserved to know the full story of the bullet she had dodged for our family. She listened quietly, her expression somber, her hands clenched in her lap. "Shh, are they going to be okay?" she asked, her voice small. It was a testament to her good heart that thankfully took after her grandfather, that even after what they had done, she still worried about her parents. "They are adults, Emma," I said gently, taking her hand. It felt so small in mine. "They have made their own choices, and now they have to face the consequences. That is not your burden to carry. Your only responsibility is to yourself." I squeezed her hand. "Your only job is to focus on your future, to study hard, to be happy, to design beautiful buildings that will stand long after all of us are gone. I've made sure your college fund is secure. It's in a new trust in your name only. No one can touch it." She looked at me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I'm so sorry you had to go through all of this." "Don't be sorry," I said, pulling her into a hug that felt like it carried the weight of years. "You were brave. You were loyal. You did the right thing. You saved me, and you saved our family's legacy. You are the best part of us, Emma. Never forget that." 6 months can feel like a lifetime. The seasons turned, winter's chill giving way to the tentative warmth of a Carolina spring. The raw, gaping wound in my life began to scar over. I knew it would always be there, a faint, silvery reminder of the betrayal, but it no longer ached with every breath. The phantom limb of a mother's love for her son still troubled me in the quiet hours of the night, but during the day, I was too busy building to let it haunt me. I didn't sell Wilson Construction. I didn't retire. I doubled down. I threw myself back into the work, not with the frantic energy of someone running from their problems, but with the focused passion of someone who had been reminded of what they were fighting for. I promoted a brilliant young woman from within the company, a single mother named Maria, to be my chief operating officer. She had the grit and the vision that Trevor had always lacked. Together, we spearheaded a new initiative, something I had dreamed of for years but had always put off. We established the Wilson Foundation. Its mission was simple: to provide grants and mentorship to women over 50 looking to start their own businesses. I was taking the pain of my own story, the story of a woman who had to fight to protect what was hers, and trying to build something positive from it. The first grant recipient was a 58-year-old woman who wanted to open a bakery. Seeing the look on her face when I handed her the check was more satisfying than closing any multi-million-dollar deal. The calls from Trevor stopped. After a few initial desperate attempts to beg for a bailout, which I had Linda field with a polite but firm, "Mrs. Wilson has no comment at this time," He seemed to have accepted his new reality. I heard through a distant cousin that he was working some low-level sales job for a company that sold industrial cleaning supplies, living in a small apartment across the state. Meredith had disappeared entirely, likely trying to rebuild her life under a different name in a different city. They were ghosts, figures from a past life, their story a cautionary tale I would one day tell my great-grandchildren. My relationship with Emma, however, blossomed. We talked every week, not about the past, but about the future. She was thriving in her architecture program, her designs filled with light and innovation. She sent me sketches of a community center she was designing for a class project, and they were brilliant. She was my true legacy. Not the steel and glass of my buildings, but the strength, integrity, and compassion I saw growing in her every day. She was proof that the best parts of our family, the parts that came from Robert and me, had endured. This evening, I'm sitting on my back porch, a place Robert and I designed together. A glass of iced tea sweats on the small table beside me. I'm watching the sun set behind the tall North Carolina pines, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. A gentle breeze rustles the leaves in the old oak tree, and the air is filled with the sweet scent of the jasmine we planted years ago. For the first time in years, my mind is quiet. The constant, low-grade hum of anxiety about Trevor is gone. I don't regret what I did. I mourn the son I lost long before that day in the boardroom, the little boy who loved building blocks and believed his mother was the strongest person in the world. But I don't regret protecting myself, my company, and the life I built. I've learned one of life's hardest lessons. Love cannot be a blank check. It cannot be an endless well of forgiveness for those who are determined to poison it. True love, I think, sometimes requires the hardest of boundaries. It requires you to have the courage to say, I love you, but I will not allow you to destroy me. Strength isn't about how much you can endure. It's about knowing when to stop enduring. It's about having the courage to perform the surgery, to cut away what is killing you so that the healthy parts can heal and thrive. My dear San, my true legacy isn't just a company or a foundation. It's that lesson. It's the quiet strength to stand up for your own worth, even if it means standing against your own blood. Thank you for listening, for letting me share this piece of my life with you. Your presence here from all corners of the globe has been a quiet comfort on this long evening. The story of what happened in that boardroom is a painful one, but it's mine, and telling it has been part of the healing. It makes me wonder about the stories each of you hold in your own hearts. Have you ever been pushed to a breaking point, forced to make an impossible choice to protect what you've built or who you love? I hope you'll share your thoughts in the comments below. Your wisdom and your experiences matter. They create a community, and in community, there is strength. Good night from my quiet little corner of the world.